a bit darker, or switching up your coffee order tomorrow morning. Or just maybe there's someone somewhere that makes a move. A move that's morphed into a movement of millions that cling on to this transformation as their sole source of hope in this forever-changing world. For years now, technology has been a prominent source of change. With this, and for the sake of countries less fortunate than the United States, I, Raquel Reis, propose the question, in what ways would developing innovative technological resources impact global advances in agriculture for the betterment or worsening of developing countries? Since 1000 BC, technological trends in terms of European and North American countries remaining dominant over African and Asian countries have remained the same. As the technology revolution has been progressing for decades, Gershon Dublin and Joseph Paradiso best explained how technology is everywhere. Simple cranberry bogs in Massachusetts, USA can no longer just be cranberry bogs. Instead, they are an experimental plain, densely populated with sensor technology devices, a focal point of Dublin and Paradiso's MIT research that monitor every second experienced by the bogs. This proves to be very advantageous. However, developing countries are not among the beneficiaries of modern agricultural technology, and therefore we can look at them like an incomplete puzzle. Could it be possible that these tiny sensor devices are the missing piece we have been looking for? In the map on the screen, you see the populations of undernourished people in developing countries. The darker the country, the greater the amount of populations undernourished, leaving Ethiopia as many as 35 million residents on a daily basis starving. Now, some people imply that using agricultural technology systems in these countries is not feasible, and therefore they say that we should rely on these boxes of cargo and support these countries through foreign imports. In addition to this, certain health professionals object to the uses of certain agricultural technologies due to their effect on human health. However, when considering the needs of these countries in the long term, the technological advancements in agriculture that have been made in developed countries must be implemented in developing countries in order to increase their crop production, a factor which determines their way of life. Going into this will be biotechnology, sensor technology, and monetary evaluation. Scientifically speaking, biotechnology, a process which involves the genetic modification of crops using bioengineering, will be the initial step. Dr. Antoinette Mannion and Stephen Morse, both professors at alternate universities, referenced an example from India and China as cotton farmers were introduced to biotechnology. In India, there was a 39% decrease, and in China, a whole 60% decrease in the use of pesticides. Due to these yellow flag signs that we see across lawns in the United States, we know how detrimental pesticides can be to both human and animal health. Therefore, by using biotechnology to decrease the dependence on these pesticides in developing countries, the natural environment will be preserved and allowed to flourish. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the British Medical Association expresses their skepticism on the process as they imply that the health effects on humans have not yet to be examined. However, this is the British Medical Association, members of a very developed country that are not addressing the immediate health needs of these countries. They fail to acknowledge how genetically modified organisms, going back to the chart by Dr. Mannion and Morse, allow for yield increases due to reduced losses. In China, it being 8 to 10%, in India, a 31%. With reduced losses, that means more food for these countries, thus answering the immediate health concerns. Now, back to the positives. Martin Livermore, a biotechnology researcher, references an example from Mexico when scientists altered the root contents of maize products, thus allowing them to thrive in highly acidic soil. In areas in Africa, as shown here, in red, yellow, and orange, this highly acidic soil is very common, as well as the staple crop of maize. Therefore, this specific biotechnology could be applied to these areas and the developing countries here in order to increase farm success. Sensor technology will be the next step, again scientifically speaking, to monitor this biotechnology's success. Larrabee Farms in California, USA have been thriving since 1918. However, as expressed by Keith Larrabee, the head farmer, they have not seen as much success as they have since the introduction of sensor technology. With this, Genadizis Moskvins of the Latvia University of Agriculture explains how intelligent technologies and systems with a specific emphasis on sensor technology allow for farmers to save both money and power as they reduce the dependence on energy in agriculture. Although this information is limited to the small amount of agricultural farmers in developing countries that use energy-required tools, those that do are expected to experience immense benefits. In addition to this, Aristide, a professor specializing in geodetic engineering, explains how sensor technology systems contribute to the measuring of air temperature, humidity, ambient light, volumetric moisture content in soil, and provide recommendations for prevention, watering, and fertilization. Therefore, it is of no question that these sensor technology devices must move out of the developed countries alone and into the developing countries of the world, as they depend on this agriculture in order to fund themselves. Now, monetary evaluation will be the third and final step. To begin, Luis Ruiz Garcia a professor specializing in technologies applied to agriculture, explains how wireless sensor networks not only provide consistent monitoring and are effective, but they're also low in cost, meaning farmers can afford more, allowing them to densely populate their farms, thus increasing their awareness of not only specific plots of land, but their farm as a whole. In addition to this, we'll dive into the gross domestic products of countries. The least developed countries are shown here in yellow, and they're expected to survive off of supplies and income less than the estimated cost of the Iron Man suit. With this, Kerman Zuman Husov of the Faculty of Forestry at University of Putra Malaysia explains how international scientists and donors must be excited in this process. Using the donors will provide the initial funds needed to move into these developing countries with the technologies. Going back to the idea that agriculture technology are a bad thing and that imports are needed, there are some pros to it. As it does provide countries with something, there is no chaotic change, as this is the method we have been using for centuries, and the reliability of developed countries is portrayed. However, as depicted here, the cons are much overpowering. There is limited to no technology in the time we are trying to inspire technological change. Starvation is still a major issue despite these imports. The countries are not taking advantage of available resources, and there are long-term complications due to the excessive dependability on the developed countries. To continue, if my solution is applied in these countries, the individuality of developing countries must be excited in the process, as they make decisions for themselves, not based on the opinions of the developed countries. In addition to this, local and national economies must contribute in order to get out, and scientific advancement in the technological revolution will be allowed. Those last 2 points, as we are trying to inspire technology across the world, will not only benefit the developing countries alone, but will benefit the world as a whole. The examples in this are limited to experiments, and this is a broad overview, thus not applying to the specific needs of every developing country. Nevertheless, if the funds are initially provided in the process, biotechnology and sensor technology will allow for farmers to increase their crop production. This not only allows them to support themselves and their families who are currently starving as I speak, but also participate in foreign and national trade and sales, therefore increasing their personal income and the gross domestic product of their countries. If these technologies were to be applied, there would be an increase in food and a decrease in starvation. Technology access would be provided, and along with this, there would be two-way benefits between developed and developing countries. As long as farmers remain picking crops with their hands in these countries, we as one must pick up the failure of previous technological leaders and inspire change in these countries, because we must create the movement, that movement of millions.
Raquel, how did your research question evolve as you moved through the research process?
As I moved through the research process, I came to be a lot more knowledgeable on my topic. For example, I started off on my research question, instead of the word developing countries, I had the words third world countries in there. However, as I learned more about the current circumstances, I found that developing countries is a much more popular term because they apply to a lot more countries rather than just the term third world. Other than that, my research question from the original remained relatively the same. As you can see, my research was moving in the same process throughout the entire time, as I began by diving into Dublin and Paradiso's research about sensor technology and ended with looking into the same technologies such as Luis Ruiz Garcia's article also about sensor technology that was both at the beginning and end of my research process, therefore proving how my research question remained the same, focusing on the same topics throughout my entire process.
So you partially answered this, but I'll ask it anyway. The follow-up to that is, did your research go in a different direction than you originally planned or hypothesized?
Originally, I had the exact thought of using these ideas of technological revolution in these countries. However, I was not aware of the different technologies, such as sensor technology and biotechnology, and therefore leading me to the monetary evaluation step. So again, as I dove further into the research and learned about these different technologies that we could apply to the countries and the practicality of providing access to these countries, I therefore further enhanced my research rather than just looking at technology as a broad overview.
What might be the real-world implications or consequences of your findings, and what are the implications to your community?
In terms of the world as a whole, we are in a time where technology is a necessity. We live every day based on scientific advancements. Therefore, by allowing all the countries around the world, rather than just developed countries, to have access to these to have access to technology that would thus allow for scientific advancement overall to improve. For example, while doing some preliminary research, I found that providing certain technologies to these countries was in fact very beneficial, such as an MIT researcher who is using fab labs in developing countries, miniature labs that allow for average people to go create extraordinary things. They found that these technology accesses were very helpful. Therefore, if these specific technologies are implied, these countries will gain access to a certain level of technology that we have not yet seen, therefore increasing the scientific advancement of the world overall. In terms of my community, although this research focused mainly on developing countries, it could also focus on developing communities, such as my city. We are at a time where the homeless population is very high, and in order for us to increase resources, such for food kitchens or different resources that these homeless people turn to, we could use these methods to decrease the amount of money that must go into crop production, therefore increasing the amount of resources available in soup kitchens and different things in order to benefit the homeless population in my community.